Sega attempts a mulligan, and in 3D to boot. This is Sega Masters. Yep, it's Space Harrier on the Master System. Again. Our third game in the summer of the Sega sequel is supposedly a follow-up to the original attempt at bringing Yu Suzuki's classic arcade rail shooter to the home console. And it's a SegaScope 3D title as well, the fourth one to be precise, meaning more 3D fun with the LCD shutter specs. I'm guessing Sega was reaching for ideas for SegaScope carts and decided to revisit an old favorite a second time, and this would happen again down the line. That's not to say the original Space Harrier wouldn't have made a solid candidate for the SegaScope line, since the original arcade game had plenty of 3D action and scaling. It's just a little odd how Sega would want to craft a 3D version of a super scalar coin-op they already struggled to put on their console once before. Back in episode 20 we covered Sega's original home port of Space Harrier, which was released the previous year and was also the first 2 mega cartridge. The cart certainly tried its hardest to emulate the coin-op and was somewhat playable, yet the choppy scaling and frame rate made it clear the console's limitations just couldn't handle a straight-up port of a super scalar arcade game, something Sega would attempt to ignore again and again. Nonetheless, Sega went ahead with Space Harrier 3D and even attempts to pass it off as a sequel to the first game. You of course take control of the aforementioned Harrier, who's once again called upon to save the day after the land of dragons is apparently under siege by another evil force. These invaders have also captured the Harrier's friend Uriah, the good dragon you rode in the original game's bonus stages, so you zoom off to the rescue. Sega crafted 13 all-new stages of 3D rail shooting action to make this cart feel like an actual second chapter, even going with a darker sci-fi-ish theme in contrast to the first game's brightly colored worlds. However, the visuals are the only real difference between the two games, as the gameplay is just about identical to the original Space Harrier. You still fly across the checkered landscapes toward the horizon, blasting the baddies that soar your way with your cannon and dodging their projectiles, while also avoiding the indestructible poles and obstacles. Of course, smacking into anything will result in an instant loss of life. No new gameplay features are introduced to help this follow-up truly stand out from its predecessor. Graphics-wise, the sprites do have a somewhat cleaner look to them, unlike the mostly jumbled messes from the first game, though how Sega got away with blatantly using TIE fighters from Star Wars as enemy ships is anyone's guess. And backgrounds are actually supplied for the horizon this time around. Now, I recorded this footage using the cart's hidden 2D mode, and thus can't accurately depict the 3D effects. I can say that the 3D is pretty remarkable when viewing the action with the glasses, since you do get a convincing sense of depth. Unfortunately, the 3D can't cover up the fact that the issues the first cart had with replicating the coin-op scaling carried over to this entry. The enemies and projectiles still look like they're being stamped onto the screen, and the animation is as choppy as before. At the end of each stage is, of course, a boss you must slay in one-on-one combat before continuing your mission. This first boss is pretty much like the dragon in the previous game, only with an armored shell, and some of the other bosses also follow familiar patterns from the first cart. In any case, you know the drill. Plug him with enough shots and he'll go down, allowing you to advance to the next level with a different color scheme and set of hazards. And this goes on for 13 total levels, though no bonus stages are provided this time around. Just like the first game, the last level has you facing all the bosses a second time in one long gauntlet before doing battle with the so-called evil Dragon King himself in the final showdown. But while Space Harrier 3D may be neat to look at, it's just not much fun to actually play. Granted, the first game had its issues with choppy frame rate and scaling, but was playable for the most part if you could look past them. Not only did Sega fail to address those shortcomings with this follow-up, they seem even worse here. Despite the responsive controls, the chunky animation and sluggish speed makes the entire game feel like it's moving in slow motion, which is unacceptable in a genre that requires fast action to be enjoyable. The hazard's molasses speed also makes it hard to accurately process their movements, leading to more than a few frustrating deaths. Given that other SegaScope titles we've looked at, such as Missile Defense and Zaxxon 3D, both sport mostly smooth animation and gameplay, this issue is rather unexplainable. Accessing the 2D mode to be able to play without the glasses is also needlessly complicated. You have to play through the game once and earn a high enough score, then enter a secret code on the high score table to enable it, instead of simply having an option on the title screen. Not only is unlocking the 2D mode counterintuitive, switching off to 3D makes the game even more unplayable and hard to follow. The music consists of the classic Space Harrier theme and some new background tunes that aren't as fun to listen to as the original game's music, and the scratchy Death Scream and Get Ready voice clips are included as well. So Space Harrier 3D is pretty much a bust in several ways. It's another SegaScope title that tries to get by entirely on its gimmick without any decent gameplay to back it up. Not to mention Sega simply applied a fresh coat of paint to the first game and called it a sequel instead of offering any new experiences for fans of the original. What we're left with is a glorified mission pack with fancy effects thrown in, one that would finally convince Sega not to attempt any more Space Harrier games on the Master System, since the console just can't handle it. Thus, the next game in the series would appear the following year on the Genesis, the somewhat decent Space Harrier 2. However, after that entry, the Space Harrier franchise would all but go on a nearly permanent hiatus, sharing the same fate as Fantasy Zone. As far as Space Harrier 3D goes, check it out only if you really need another cart for the 3D glasses. Otherwise, there are better Space Harrier games out there, ones that don't require the specs. So you'd be better off zooming past this sad chapter in the saga.